It was a damp October evening in Lexington, Kentucky, the self-proclaimed horse capital of the world. The rain came down in sheets, drumming on the corrugated tin roof of the bluegrass auction barn. Inside, the air was thick with the mingled scents of wet hay, mud, and anticipation. Buyers from across the country leaned against the wooden rails, their cowboy boots planted firmly in the damp straw, their sharp eyes fixed on the arena below, where the last few horses of the night were being paraded before the crowd. Most of the earlier sales had been electric. Yearlings with perfect bloodlines, sleek two-year-olds already showing the promise of speed, mares with pedigrees tied to Kentucky Derby winners. Each had sparked bidding wars that made the air vibrate with tension. But as the night dragged on, the energy shifted. The crowd grew weary. The rain outside pounded harder, and the latest horse stepping into the ring drew little more than a collective sigh. He was a chestnut, or what was left of one. His coat, once perhaps burnished like copper, was now dull and matted with grime. His ribs showed plainly beneath loose skin, his mane tangled and lifeless, his eyes clouded with exhaustion. He stood in the center of the arena as though he belonged to another time, forgotten and discarded, a relic of a world that had moved on without him. When the stable boy tugged at the lead rope, the horse obeyed but without spark, moving with deliberate heaviness, each hoof landing with a hollow thud on the straw-covered ground. The auctioneer, a lanky man named Virgil Henshaw, whose patchy mustache never seemed to grow in evenly, tapped his gavel against the podium and muttered into the microphone, "All right, folks, here we've got, well, an unregistered chestnut gelding. No pedigree on file, age unknown, condition. Well, you can see for yourselves. Let's start the bidding at $50. A silence deeper than the rain filled the barn. Buyers exchanged bored glances. A few shifted uncomfortably, as though simply being asked to acknowledge this animal was an inconvenience. They had come for the glamour, for the blue-blooded stock that might carry them to glory at Churchill Downs, not for a creature that looked like it barely had the strength to lift its head. In the back of the barn, unnoticed until now, a man in a dark baseball cap and a weathered denim jacket leaned against the railing. He'd been quiet all night, his presence half concealed by the brim of his cap pulled low over his brow. But the way he stood, broad-shouldered, still carrying himself with a kind of quiet confidence, drew the occasional glance from those who recognized him. They whispered, nudging each other. Was that really him? Was that Bruce Springsteen? He didn't move when the auctioneer called again. $50, anyone? 50? The horse stood waiting, ears flicking at the sound of the rain, as if resigned to whatever fate lay before him. A murmur of laughter rippled through the crowd. One man in a tailored jacket muttered loud enough for others to hear, "Hell, they ought to pay us to haul that bag of bones out of here." Bruce felt something stir inside him. He had grown up in Freehold, New Jersey, among factory workers and small-town folks who knew the sting of being overlooked, discarded, forgotten. Looking at the horse, something about those eyes, tired yet stubborn, worn but unbroken, struck a chord deep within him. Maybe it was pity, maybe it was instinct. He wasn't sure. All he knew was that he couldn't watch the animal be mocked and left to waste. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his hand. 50! The crowd twisted, eyes snapping to him. A few gasps, a chuckle here, a whisper there. "Is that Springsteen?" Someone hissed. "What the hell's he doing here?" The auctioneer blinked in surprise, then quickly found his rhythm. 50, I have 50 from Mr. He squinted as if confirming what his eyes told him. "Mr. Springsteen. Do I hear 60? 60? Silence. Not a soul moved. "Sold," Henshaw said at last, slamming the gavel down. "To Mr. Springsteen, for $50. The chestnut horse flicked his ears at the sound, lifting his head slightly for the first time. The crowd began to disperse, their conversations buzzing with speculation. Bruce ignored them. He stepped forward, his boots crunching in the damp straw, and reached for the lead rope. The horse flinched slightly but did not resist. Up close, Bruce could see the old scars along its legs, the faded white stripe down its forehead, the bones pressing against skin too thin to cover them. And yet, there was something else. In the way the horse moved, slow, yes, but controlled, deliberate, there was a dignity that hunger and neglect had not erased. Bruce sighed under his breath. "Guess it's you and me now, buddy." He gave the rope a gentle tug and led the horse out of the arena. The rain outside was still falling, softening into a steady drizzle. He loaded the animal into a rented trailer, hitched to his black Ford pickup, its headlights glowing dim against the Kentucky fog. As he climbed behind the wheel, he felt the weight of the night settle on him. He had no business buying another horse, especially not one in such poor condition. His farm, back in Colts Neck, New Jersey, already had more animals than it needed. But something in those eyes had spoken to him, a story unfinished, a truth unspoken. The road out of Lexington stretched dark and empty. The wipers beat a steady rhythm, keeping time like a snare drum against the windshield. Behind him, in the trailer, the horse shifted, hooves clattering softly on the metal floor. Bruce tightened his grip on the wheel. He had no idea yet what kind of storm he had just stepped into, only that this old, forgotten animal was about to change everything. The rain had eased into a mist by the time Bruce crossed the George Washington Bridge, the bright lights of Manhattan glittering to his right. Traffic was sparse in the early morning hours, and the hum of the tires on wet asphalt blended with the soft rustle of the horse shifting in the trailer behind him. Crossing into New Jersey always felt like coming home. The air smelled different here, heavier with salt from the Atlantic, tinged with memory. Freehold wasn't far now. He turned off the interstate, winding through familiar backroads. Clapboard houses, small diners and corner stores flickered by, half asleep in the glow of the street lamps. It reminded him of his youth, long nights spent dreaming about stages far away, carrying his guitar and heart full of restless songs. Now, decades later, the roads led him back to the same soil, but with a chestnut horse in tow instead of an amp and a band. By the time Bruce pulled into his farm in Colts Neck, dawn had begun to soften the horizon. The wooden gate creaked as he swung it open, mud sucking at his boots. The place was quiet, peaceful, rolling pastures, weathered barns, and the faint smell of hay drifting in the cool morning air. He parked the truck by the stable, climbed out, and unlatched the trailer door. For a moment, the horse didn't move. He stood still, ears twitching at the sound of the ocean breeze carrying through the pines. Then, with slow, deliberate steps, he walked down the ramp. Bruce studied him in the pale light. Up close, the scars were more visible, faint white streaks running along his legs, evidence of battles fought long ago. The horse's ribs pressed against his skin, but his movements betrayed something else, strength, control, a quiet determination. He wasn't desperate like most neglected animals. He was measured, almost as if he carried himself with a sense of purpose that no hardship could erase. "Let's get you settled," Bruce muttered, guiding him into an empty stall inside the barn. The wooden walls were warm with the scent of hay and earth. He filled a bucket with water, placed it inside, and leaned against the stall door as the horse lowered his head to drink. He didn't gulp it down like most would. Instead, he drank carefully, pausing between sips, his deep brown eyes watching Bruce the entire time. "What's your story, boy?" Bruce asked quietly. That's when he saw it. A faint marking beneath the mud and grime caked on the horse's side. At first it looked like nothing more than a smudge. But when Bruce stepped closer, brushing the dirt away with his calloused fingers, his breath caught. It was a brand, faded, weathered by time, but unmistakable. A circle pierced by an arrow. Bruce froze, his pulse quickening. He had seen that mark before. Holston Stables, one of the most prestigious breeding operations in Kentucky, home to champions whose bloodlines were worth millions. What in God's name was a Holston horse doing half-starved at a backwoods auction in Lexington? And more importantly, why had no one claimed him? He took a step back, memories clawing at the edges of his mind. He remembered the Kentucky Derby, the electric energy of Churchill Downs, the names of champions whispered like legends, Secretariat, American Pharaoh, Justify. Holston Stables had always been at the center of that world, their horses commanding headlines and fortunes. If this animal bore their brand, then he was no nameless stray. He had history, perhaps even glory, buried beneath the scars and neglect. Bruce exhaled slowly. He knew he needed answers. He rummaged through the tack room, pulling open an old file cabinet he had kept for years, filled with auction catalogues and racing magazines. It was a habit he had carried with him, a fascination with horses that paralleled his obsession with music. Flipping through the brittle pages, his eyes darted over bloodlines, names, and brands. And then he found it, a photograph. Younger, shining, muscles lean and defined. The same white stripe on the forehead, the same fire in the eyes. Printed beneath the image, the name in bold letters. Waymaker. Sired by Iron Legacy, owned by Holston Stables, Bruce's stomach tightened. He knew that name. Everyone in the racing world had heard it. Waymaker had been one of the most promising racehorses in the country 5 years ago. Known as the horse with heart, he was famous for his impossible comebacks, charging from behind to seize victory when all seemed lost. People had said he was destined for greatness, the next legend of Churchill Downs. And then, just before the Belmont Stakes, he vanished. No explanation, no statement. Rumors spread, an injury, a doping scandal, a cover-up, but nothing concrete. He simply disappeared. And now here he was, standing in Bruce Springsteen's barn in New Jersey, bought for $50 at a forgotten auction. Bruce leaned against the stall door, staring at Waymaker. The horse lifted his head, meeting his gaze with those deep, knowing eyes. It was as if he were silently daring Bruce to uncover the truth. A chill crept down Bruce's spine. He had no idea what kind of storm he had just walked into, but one thing was clear. This was no ordinary horse. Bruce didn't sleep that night. He sat at the worn oak table in his farmhouse kitchen, the glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across stacks of old catalogues and racing journals. Waymaker's photograph lay in front of him, the name bold beneath the younger version of the horse, now standing just yards away in his barn. Bruce tapped his fingers against the wood, restless. For 50 years he had written songs about the overlooked, the beaten down, the forgotten souls of America. And now, staring at the faded picture of a champion discarded like trash, he felt like the horse was another verse waiting to be sung. By dawn, Bruce was back on the road, heading south. His destination was Nashville, Tennessee. He had friends there, musicians, yes, but also horsemen. Nashville wasn't just the heart of country music. It was close to Kentucky, close to Churchill Downs, close to the stories that still swirled around Holston Stables. If anyone knew whispers from 5 years ago, they'd be there. The miles stretched out before him on I-81, the truck's engine humming as the autumn colors of Virginia's Shenandoah Valley blurred past his window. Bruce thought of Waymaker in the trailer behind him, dozing, shifting now and then. He wondered what memories stirred inside that horse. Did he remember the thunder of hooves on the dirt track at Belmont? Did he recall the roar of the crowd, the snap of the reins, the taste of victory? Or had it all been buried under years of neglect, locked away with scars no one could see? He reached Nashville by evening. The city glowed with neon and music spilling from honky-tonks along Broadway. But Bruce wasn't here for the stage. He parked his truck outside a small diner off the main drag, the kind of place where horsemen and gamblers still swapped stories over black coffee and pie. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of fried food and tobacco, the jukebox humming with an old Hank Williams tune. Bruce slid into a booth across from Levi Grayson, an old friend from way back. Levi had once been a trainer at Holston, a man who had touched the heights of the racing world before falling hard after a scandal that had never quite been explained. His hair was grayer now, his frame stiff, but his eyes still carried that sharpness of a man who had lived too much on the edge. "You still alive, boss?" Levi said, a wry smile curling beneath his stubble. Bruce leaned forward, pulling a folded photo from his jacket. "You tell me." Levi took it, squinting under the diner's flickering light. His face drained of color. "Son of a bitch, Waymaker. So it is him," Bruce said softly. Levi's hand trembled slightly as he set the photo down. "I thought he was dead." "Most folks did," Bruce replied. "Picked him up at an auction in Lexington." $50, Levi let out a low whistle. You don't just stumble on a horse like that. Not unless someone wanted him gone. Badly. Bruce studied his friend's face. Tell me what happened? Levi's eyes darted around the diner, wary. He leaned in, his voice low. 5 years ago, right before the Belmont, Holston pulled him. Said he was injured. But that horse wasn't lame, Bruce. I saw him run. He was fire. There were rumors, dope tests, shady deals, maybe even something darker. Then one night, poof, gone. Holston said nothing. No statement, no explanation. Just buried the story. And now? Bruce asked. Levi rubbed his temples. Now he's standing in your barn, which means trouble. Holston's got money, power, politicians in their pockets. If they let Waymaker disappear, they had a reason. And if they find out he's alive, he shook his head, they won't just come for him. They'll come for you. Bruce sat back, letting the words settle. He had spent his life standing against the tide. Record labels, critics, the grind of the road. But this was different. This was power with teeth, power that erased champions like chalk from a blackboard. And yet, looking at Waymaker's photo, Bruce knew he couldn't walk away. The horse deserved more. The truth deserved more. The next morning, Bruce drove north to Louisville, Kentucky, home of Churchill Downs. The twin spires rose against the autumn sky, iconic and immovable. Here, history lived in every brick and blade of grass. He wandered the grounds, blending in with the tourists, listening. Old trainers lingered near the stables, swapping half-truths. Gamblers whispered of a night 5 years ago when something had gone wrong, terribly wrong, at Holston. A fight, a deal collapsed. A man dead, though no one could prove it. Bruce's gut tightened. Waymaker hadn't just been hidden. He had been erased. And someone had paid the price for knowing too much. He returned to Colt's Neck with the weight of secrets pressing heavy on his shoulders. That night in his kitchen, the phone rang. Levi's voice was sharp, urgent. They know, Bruce. Holston knows he's alive. Watch your back. Bruce glanced out the window toward the barn, where Waymaker shifted in the straw, his silhouette framed in the glow of the light. Outside, the wind rattled the trees, carrying with it the promise of a storm yet to come. The following evening, the air over Colt's Neck hung heavy, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. Bruce had spent the day working the farm, his hands busy but his mind restless. Waymaker moved with more energy now, his coat slowly regaining a shine, his strides steady and purposeful. The transformation was striking, but it also made the danger sharper. He wasn't invisible anymore. As dusk fell, Bruce sat on the porch of his farmhouse, guitar across his lap, strumming absent-mindedly while the crickets sang. The peace was broken by the distant crunch of tires on gravel. His chest tightened. No one came down his long driveway unannounced, not at this hour. A black SUV crept into view, headlights slicing through the dark. It rolled to a stop just beyond the porch. Bruce set his guitar aside, rising slowly, his boots heavy against the planks. The driver's door opened, followed by the passengers. 2 men stepped out. The first was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark wool coat that screamed money and authority. The second was wiry, sharp-eyed, his movements quick and calculated, like a predator sizing up prey. The taller man smiled, but it was the kind of smile that never touched the eyes. "Mr. Springsteen," he said, his voice smooth and low. "A pleasure. Richard Holston." Bruce's gut twisted. The name was legend in Kentucky, a kingmaker in racing, a man whose stables produced champions like factories produced cars. That he was standing here, in New Jersey, told Bruce everything he needed to know. Waymaker mattered. Holston slipped a sleek leather wallet from his coat, flipping it open to show a badge that caught the porch light. "I won't take much of your time. I believe you recently acquired a horse at auction in Lexington." Bruce kept his face neutral. "I pick up horses now and then." Holston's gaze flicked toward the barn, sharp and knowing. "This one is different. Chestnut, faded stripe branded. He belonged to me once." Behind Bruce, the screen door creaked open. Levi stepped out, his presence silent but solid, a shadow at Bruce's shoulder. "Funny," Levi said, his voice low and edged. "I thought you told the world Waymaker was gone." Holston barely glanced at him. "I'm not here to discuss the past." I'm here to correct a mistake." His eyes snapped back to Bruce. "Sell him back to me, Mr. Springsteen. Name your price. I'll make it worth your while." Bruce's fists clenched at his sides. Every instinct told him this wasn't about reclaiming property. This was about burying something, permanently. "Not interested," he said evenly. The wiry man beside Holston finally spoke, his tone cold as steel. "That's a mistake." A long silence stretched, thick as the humid night air. Holston adjusted the cuff of his coat, exhaling through his nose. "Think it over, Mr. Springsteen. But let me warn you, some things are better left buried." He turned without waiting for an answer. Striding back to the SUV, the wiry man lingered. His sharp eyes locked on Bruce like a silent threat before following. The doors shut. The engine rumbled. And just as quietly as they came, they were gone. Bruce let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Levi cursed under his breath. That wasn't an offer. That was a warning. Bruce turned his gaze toward the barn. Inside, Waymaker shifted, ears twitching, head lifting as if he sensed the tension in the night. Bruce's jaw set hard. Holston had made one thing clear. Waymaker wasn't just a horse to him. He was a problem. And problems like this didn't get second chances, but Bruce wasn't about to back down. The storm broke 2 nights later. Bruce and Levi sat at the kitchen table, the farmhouse silent, except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Papers were spread across the wood, old auction records, racing magazines, clippings from newspapers 5 years past. Every trail led to the same dead end. Waymaker had disappeared, scrubbed from history like chalk wiped clean. Then came the knock. It was sharp, urgent, rattling against the farmhouse door. Bruce tensed. Levi rose, his hand instinctively brushing the rifle that leaned by the wall. Bruce opened the door to find a young woman standing on the porch. Her jacket was soaked from the misty rain, her dark hair clinging to her face. She looked nervous, but her chin lifted with quiet determination. "My name is Claire Lawson," she said. Her voice wavered but held firm. "I know about Waymaker, and I know why Holston wants him dead." Bruce stepped aside, motioning her in. Inside, Claire wrapped her hands around a mug of coffee as though it were the only thing keeping her steady. "My father worked at Holston Stables. Ray Lawson. 5 years ago he found out something he wasn't supposed to. One night he never came home. Holston told everyone he'd been drunk, fell from the hayloft. But my father didn't drink, and he damn sure didn't fall." Levi stiffened. His eyes darkened with recognition. "The same night Waymaker vanished." Claire nodded, her jaw trembling. From her pocket, she pulled a small flash drive and set it on the table. He must have known something was coming. He hid this before they got to him. Security footage from that night. It shows everything. Holston, my father, the fight, and what happened after. The weight of the tiny device pressed down heavier than stone. Proof, finally proof. Bruce reached for it, but headlights cut across the window. The sound of tires crunching on gravel froze the room. Levi darted to the curtain, pulling it back just an inch. His face went pale. "Black SUV, same as before." Claire's breath hitched. "They found me." The first gunshot shattered the window, glass spraying across the room. Levi shoved Claire down. "Move!" He barked. Bruce didn't think, he acted. "To the barn!" They bolted into the rain, boots sinking in the mud. Another shot cracking the night behind them. Bruce's lungs burned as he flung open the barn doors. Waymaker lifted his head, ears flicking, muscles tensing. The fire that had once carried him through impossible races burned in his eyes again. "No time for a saddle," Bruce muttered, grabbing the reins. He swung onto Waymaker's back with the ease of a man who had learned balance on stage long before he ever thought to ride a horse. Claire scrambled up behind him, clutching tight. Levi mounted another horse from the stalls, his jaw set grimly. "Go!" Levi shouted. Gunfire tore through the barn as Holston's men closed in. Bruce dug his heels into Waymaker's sides. For a heartbeat the world held its breath. Then the old champion exploded forward. His hooves thundered against the soaked earth, mud flying as he surged into the storm. Behind them, engines roared. The SUVs barreled down the drive, headlights slicing the rain, tires spinning in the muck. But Waymaker ran like he had been born for this moment. Age melted from his body. Each stride was power, rhythm, defiance. Ahead loomed the railway bridge, rotting wood and rusted rails spanning the swollen river below. A death trap. But their only shot. Come on, boy, Bruce whispered, his voice fierce with belief. Waymaker lunged onto the bridge. The planks groaned, cracked, but held. Levi's horse followed, hooves striking sparks on the steel rails. Behind them, the first SUV skidded to a halt at the edge, unable to follow. Another tried, the wood splintering under its weight. Then the bridge gave way, collapsing into the torrent below. They burst onto the far side, soaked, breathless, alive. Bruce pulled Waymaker to a halt, his chest heaving, Claire clinging to him with wide eyes. Levi drew up beside them, rain dripping from his hat. They turned back. The bridge was gone, washed away, leaving Holston's men stranded on the other side. For a long moment, silence reigned. Then Claire exhaled, her voice breaking with relief. "We made it," Bruce leaned forward, patting Waymaker's damp neck, his own breath trembling. The horse stood tall, unshaken, his spirit blazing even in the storm. Bruce felt a slow smile cross his face. "Hell of a run, old man," he whispered. The farmhouse was dark except for the glow of the laptop screen. Rain still whispered against the windows, the remnants of the storm lingering like ghosts. Bruce sat at the table with Claire and Levi, the flash drive trembling slightly in Claire's hand before she pushed it into the port. The file opened. Grainy black and white footage filled the screen, security camera footage from Holston stables. The date stamped in the corner. 5 years ago, the night Waymaker vanished. At first, it was just the usual scene. Empty aisles, horses shifting in their stalls, the quiet order of a Kentucky racing barn. Then movement. Richard Holston entered the frame, his wool coat immaculate even in the low light. Another man followed, Ray Lawson, Claire's father. His posture was rigid, his face tense. There was no sound, but the gestures were unmistakable. Ray pointed, jabbing a finger toward something out of frame, his anger sharp even without words. Holston's response was calm at first, measured, but then it shifted. His hand struck out, a shove violent and sudden. Ray stumbled back, hitting the wall. The argument escalated, Holston grabbing him by the collar, shoving him again. Then the blow came. Ray fell, his head striking the concrete floor. He didn't move again. Claire gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't look away. Bruce's chest tightened, his jaw clenched so hard it hurt. On the screen, Holston stood over Ray for a long moment. Then he turned, gesturing. 2 other men appeared, shadows in suits. Together, they dragged Ray's body out of frame. When they returned, they led a horse into view. Waymaker, younger, gleaming, alive with fire. Holston's face twisted with rage as he barked silent orders. The men forced the horse into a trailer, and then the feed cut to black. The room was silent except for the rain. Claire's voice was barely above a whisper. "He killed my father. And Waymaker. He saw it all. That's why they buried him. That's why they want him dead." Levi exhaled sharply, his face pale. "Holy hell. This isn't just scandal. This is murder." Bruce sat back, running a hand over his face. For 50 years, he had sung about America's promises and its betrayals, about the working men who paid the price when power played dirty. And now, right here in his own barn, he held proof of one of the ugliest truths the racing world had ever hidden. "What do we do?" Claire asked, her eyes red but burning with determination. Bruce looked toward the barn, where Waymaker stood silhouetted against the light, calm, strong, watching. "We tell the truth," he said quietly. "The whole damn world's gonna hear it." Levi leaned forward. "Then we'd better move fast. Holston won't let this stand." They began making calls, to journalists Bruce trusted, to old friends in Asbury Park who still owed him favors, to contacts in Nashville who could amplify the story. Every minute, every message felt like loading another bullet into the chamber. By dawn, the farm buzzed with tension. Reporters arrived first, their vans lining the driveway. Then fans, word had spread, and people wanted to see the horse, to stand with Bruce against Holston. The crowd grew, filling the yard, spilling onto the road. Holston came too. Black SUVs rolled up, sleek and ominous. He stepped out, immaculate as always, but this time his smile faltered. Cameras flashed, microphones shoved forward. "Mr. Holston," a reporter shouted, "what do you have to say about the footage tying you to the disappearance of Ray Lawson?" Holston froze. The crowd murmured, the pressure mounting. Claire stepped forward, her voice clear, carrying. "You killed my father, and you tried to bury the truth. But Waymaker lived, and now everyone knows." The crowd erupted, anger and disbelief boiling into chants. "Justice! Justice!" Holston's eyes darted, his control slipping. He turned toward Bruce, his voice low, venomous. "You don't know what you've started." Bruce met his gaze, steady as stone. "I've been starting fires my whole life, Richard. This one's gonna burn you down." The crowd surged. Reporters broadcast the story live. The footage spread across the nation, across the world. Holston's empire cracked under the weight of truth, and through it all, Waymaker stood tall in the pasture, chestnut coat glistening in the morning sun, the heart of a champion beating strong. Bruce watched him, a smile breaking through the exhaustion. This wasn't just about a horse anymore. It was about dignity, about standing tall when the world tried to grind you down. It was about bearing witness, just like the music. In the weeks that followed, the world changed for Waymaker. The footage spread like wildfire, picked up by every major outlet from CNN to Rolling Stone. Headlines blared, "Legendary horse found alive after 5 years, proof ties racing mogul to cover-up." Richard Holston's empire crumbled under investigation, lawsuits piling like storm clouds. His once proud stables now symbols of corruption and greed. But Waymaker became something else entirely. He was no longer just a horse. He was a story, a living testament to survival against impossible odds. Photographs of the chestnut with the faded white stripe ran alongside Bruce's own weathered face, both of them survivors, both carrying scars and songs of endurance. Fans and strangers alike flocked to Freehold, to Colt's Neck, to stand by the fence and catch a glimpse of the horse who had been lost, then found. Bruce kept him close. Each morning he'd walk out to the pasture, the dew soaking his boots, guitar slung on his back. Waymaker would trot toward him, ears forward, eyes sharp and alive. Together they'd walk the fence line, the silence between them richer than words. At night, Bruce wrote. Songs poured from him, melodies woven with hoofbeats and rain, lyrics about survival, betrayal, redemption. He found himself back at the Stone Pony in Asbury Park one quiet evening, the old bar nearly empty. He took the stage with just his guitar and played a new song, about an old horse who refused to die, about truth clawing its way into daylight no matter how deep someone tried to bury it. The handful of patrons listened, hushed, some with tears in their eyes. One weekend, Claire brought her younger brother to visit. The boy stood by the fence, eyes wide as Waymaker lowered his head. For the first time since losing their father, Claire smiled fully, her grief tempered by something like hope. Bruce watched, a lump rising in his throat. Ray Lawson's children had lost so much, but maybe, just maybe, this story had given them back a piece of their father's courage. Levi stayed on too. The old trainer found new purpose in helping care for Waymaker, in mentoring young riders who came curious, drawn by the legend. His gruff voice softened when he spoke of the horse, respect etched into every word. Months passed. Spring came, green grass rolling under wide New Jersey skies. At a charity benefit for homeless veterans hosted in Asbury Park, Bruce stood backstage with his band, listening to the roar of the crowd. Beside him, Claire held a framed photo of her father. Levi leaned against the wall, arms crossed, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. When Bruce stepped out under the lights, the crowd surged to its feet. He strummed the first chord, his voice carrying through the sea air, raw and true. Behind him, on the giant screen, an image appeared. Waymaker running free across the pasture, mane flying, eyes burning with life. The applause shook the boardwalk. Not just for the music, not just for Bruce, but for the story. The horse who had been forgotten, the truth that had been buried, the courage it took to dig it back up. Later that night, long after the amps cooled and the boardwalk emptied, Bruce sat alone by the fence line, the Atlantic wind brushing through the grass. Waymaker stood nearby, silent but present, his breath rising like smoke in the cool night. Bruce rested his hands on the fence rail, his voice low, almost to himself. "Funny thing, old man. I thought I was saving you. Turns out you were saving me." The horse flicked an ear, lowering his head to graze, unbothered, eternal. Bruce looked toward the horizon, where the sea met the sky, endless and wide. Life was strange, unpredictable, songs written in scars, in hoofprints, in second chances. And sometimes, just sometimes, it gave you a story that would never stop running.